Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are cruising our way through the book of Ezekiel.
We are.
Which is a long book. And there's 48 chapters in this book. But we're at 19 now.
Yeah, so we're in week 5. So last week, we've actually seen the same story come over and over again. And we told you it was going to happen this way. Yeah. But we know Jerusalem is going to be overthrown. And we've been seeing it from different perspectives.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And last week, God explained what he was doing from his perspective, which is probably the best point of view. And we also learned that God judges each person individually, and that was definitely from mine a big takeaway. I mean, we know it, we say it, but here's where we know it from.
Yeah, and I don't think I mentioned it last time, but Israel is interesting because God had a covenant with Israel, not with each individual person within Israel. And so as the nation sinned, even if, there were definitely, we talked about the remnant, they were trying to obey God and everything. But because the covenant was national, each individual would be judged for their own sin, but the nation was judged covenantally. And so we don't quite have that. In fact, we don't have that with the church and Christians today. So there's some, we call it dispensations. There are some dispensational differences.
Just differences.
Yeah.
God treating groups of people.
Yeah. Yeah, dispensationalism says that God has worked with different people in different ways in different times. And we see that definitely with how he's working with Israel here.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to be in chapters 19 through 21. So in chapter 19, it's exciting because it's all about lions. Woo-hoo! And then as you're reading, you realize this is not about lions. So how does this work? So what it really means is we should look for something else in there. But this talks about the later kings that are in charge during the southern kingdom during this end time part. Mm-hmm. One of the lions would have been Jehoaz. He was extremely violent. He was actually taken away and removed and sent to Egypt. One of the lions was Jehoiachin. Babylon removed him, and he was actually taken to Babylon for a while. So it's these last couple kings, again from God's point of view, or at least it seems like from God's point of view. And then at the end of talking about the lions, it says, "A fire has gone out from the branch," and that's really a powerful statement there. So what I see going on here is the kings of Israel are over for now. So I got to ask you a 5-part question. So I'll just start talking. Right, we know that the kings had to come from the line of David.
Yep. And
we know that the kings stopped. Mm-hmm. So did they stop because there was no more men from the line of David who could be king? Was this stopped because there's no more land to be a king over and there was really no reason to have a king? Or was this really from God saying, I didn't want you to have kings first in the first place, so we're just going to stop right here.
Yeah. So anybody, there are definitely still people from the line of David. There are people today who could legitimately, biologically
trace their lineage back,
even if they haven't traced it back. That doesn't affect the fact that they are biologically connected. So there are men today who could be king over Israel. The problem is there's not a monarchy right now. Right? From this point, really from Nebuchadnezzar and moving forward, Israel has always been occupied. Okay, even when they came back to their land under Zerubbabel and everything, Zerubbabel, some people think that he could have been the king, but he was a governor because they're still under Persian control at that point. Then it was Greece, then it was Rome, and after Rome, it's just been, there's been no sovereign state of Israel until 1948. Right. And when they came back with a prime minister and a parliament and not a monarchy, right? So there are people today who could be king, but there is no monarchy. And that was the Davidic covenant, is there will always be somebody to sit on the throne, even if they're not sitting on the throne. Okay. Now, Luke chapter 1 promises that Jesus will actually be that Davidic king again. But yeah, that's not happening right now. And they're still under occupation, really. I mean, if you think about it, they have their own government and everything in the land, but they definitely don't have all of their land, and their parliament and everything, their Knesset, is not the government that is anywhere within the structure that God set up.
Right. Okay. All right, so that was chapter 19. Then you're going to read in chapter 20. One of the first things is there's another timestamp in there.
Yes.
And we always like timestamps.
Love the timestamps.
So we seem to move forward about a year?
Yep.
All right.
From the last time, it was at the beginning of Ezekiel, it was the 5th year of the exile. Then it was the 6th year. Now it's the 7th year, which is interesting because one of the object lessons was supposed to last for about 300 days, right? Where he was laying on his side, and then that side, and then the other thing. So, we've got, some other non-time markers that were in there too.
Right. So some of the elders come to Ezekiel, and we would be in Babylon during this time.
Yeah.
So these would be the elders who, along with Ezekiel, were taken hostage and are now living in Babylon. And now they come to Ezekiel and start asking him questions.
Yeah, they're still recognized among the people, among the captives, but...
Yeah. One of the commentaries I read about this section, it was interesting, and it said maybe the elders came forward at this time because they heard that Egypt was having a chance to help. And we've been talking about Egypt coming in and how one of the kings of Israel actually went to Egypt, or he didn't physically go to Egypt. Well, one did go to physically Egypt, but they were contacted Egypt asking for help.
Right.
Yeah, I got a big guy over here. I need another big guy to help me with my bully type of deal. And they wanted to check with God, is this right?
Is this how it's supposed to be? Yeah. Are we going to be able to go back home? Is this going to work? Right?
Yeah. So the elders come to Ezekiel to talk. God tells Ezekiel to tell the elders, why now? And then, no,
I'm not talking to you.
I will not allow you to seek me.
Yeah.
Ouch.
I'm not listening.
I am so far away from you. Really, you are so far away from me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So God talks to Ezekiel and says, hey, do you want to pronounce judgment on these guys? Which, what's he going to say? No. And not from the standpoint of gets to yell at people, but I mean, this is part of his job.
Right.
Right. So again, God goes all the way back to Egypt and Moses and tells the story from his perspective. Here's the way I see it. And remember, we heard this, but the elders haven't heard it, right? So it's God telling the elders his story.
They need to be reminded of this. Yep. One of the things that I really like about this chapter is, and you'll see this as you read through it, God talks about my Sabbaths.
Yeah, keep the Sabbaths holy.
Right.
But even more than that.
Yeah.
God considers them his.
They're his, right? And so God was the first one to take a Sabbath, right? After creation week, 6 weeks or 6 days of creation, and then he ceased from his creative work. Right. Sabbath doesn't mean nap, although it's not a bad use of the Sabbath. Just saying, God didn't sleep, but the whole point, it's interesting, is that the Sabbath was given to Israel in Exodus 16. The 10 Commandments were not given to Israel until Exodus 20. And so when he said in the 4th commandment, remember the Sabbath, it sort of had a two-pronged thing. Remember as in observe the Sabbath, but also remember, I've given this to you already. The Sabbath was somehow God considered the Sabbath really, really special. And he gave it to Israel as a gift. Here's something that I find special that I want you to have. And they spat all over it, and they stomped all over it, and they...
It's like Christmas time, right? You pick out the gift, you give it to somebody, and they're like, thanks. Next.
Yeah, I got one of these already, whatever. And in fact, he tied even the exile, the 70 years of exile were based on how many times they did not give the Sabbath years to the land. He didn't let the land rest. And so God really has a special place for the Sabbath. And the fact that he calls them my Sabbath, I let you use the Sabbath and you stomped all over my Sabbath. You could feel there's this emotion, this tension coming through chapter 20 here.
Right. And I always like it from the standpoint, maybe the elders have come and talked to Ezekiel in the past. It doesn't seem like they've talked to him very much. And they're not listening to him. But now they have a problem. Now they want something, right? And God's saying no. I find that humorous. Ezekiel tells the elders, again through God, will you defile yourself like your fathers? So in previous chapter last week, we talked about God's not holding the sons responsible, and I'm not sure if that was last week or the week before. So these elders, they're not condemned yet because of the fathers, but they're going to be they are going to be judged based on what they have done
because they're going to do the same thing.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and it's just God knows they're going to be doing the same thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I have a question on the last line in the chapter. Did you have something you wanted to talk about?
Well, there's a part here sort of in the middle of the chapter, verses right around 33 to 38, where it talks about God regathering them, bringing them back. But it doesn't seem like it's it doesn't seem like it's a good gathering, right?
Yeah.
And there are some people who teach, and I've gone back and just personally I've gone back and forth with this, and there's a really, it seems to be here in Zephaniah and some other places where God actually says he's going to regather them or provide a regathering, but in unbelief, not in belief. Now we know at the end of the tribulation, Israel will come back together, be gathered to the land in belief, in faith. They'll accept Jesus as Messiah, and they'll go into the kingdom. But here it talks about a regathering in unbelief, where they're going to be judged. He says, I'm going to pass you like the shepherd with a rod over, and some of you will actually be judged. And it seems like it's before the tribulation. And there are some people who teach that basically since World War I, World War II, you've got the Holocaust, then you've got 1948 where they're being regathered. And this is a period where, they're allowed in Israel, they're supposed to be able to be here, but this is not a time of blessing quite yet, right? And they see this first regathering here in Ezekiel 20. And like I said, Zephaniah and some other places, in fact, even other places here in Ezekiel, that seems to indicate a regathering in unbelief before the regathering in belief.
Okay. At the end of this chapter, in verse 49, Ezekiel says to God, then I said, O sovereign Lord, they are saying of me, does he not simply speak in eloquent figures of speech? I take this as a big dig from the elders, where the elders are saying, hey, this guy talks a good game, but he really doesn't speak for God.
Yeah.
Is that the way
it
seems to be read?
I mean, what have we read even just recently? There's eagles and there's vines and there's cedars and, there's these parables, and we're going to see coming up in just a few chapters, more, illustrations and word pictures, and he's, built a diorama that we're going to talk about again, and all of this stuff, all while saying, God's not listening to you. God doesn't want to talk to you, so I'll talk to you. So you can sort of see where they're like, I'm not sure if we should be listening to this guy.
Yeah.
All of his, fancy stories and everything. That sounds like what's going on.
Yeah. Plus, it's not what they wanted to hear.
Well, and it's certainly not what they wanted to hear.
All right, so now we get into chapter 21. The key word here seems to be sword.
Man, he says sword a lot in here. It's like every other
should have counted
verse. He says, and a sword, and a sword, and a sword.
Right, but the sword is coming.
Oh yeah,
right. This is Babylon attacking Jerusalem, literally breaking down the barriers, the walls, and attacking Jerusalem with the sword. Yeah. And God says, He's bringing a sword too, and He is swinging a sword.
Well, and that's the thing. It's really the thing because Nebuchadnezzar may be the one physically carrying the sword in his army, But God says, this is my sword. I'm bringing this against Jerusalem.
Yeah. And in other places he says, I am commanding these guys. I'm leading these guys.
Yep.
And that even shows up in the rest of this chapter.
Yeah.
So now we see Ezekiel, or God telling Ezekiel to make some signs.
Yeah.
And to
like
put up
signposts.
Yeah, exactly. and I picture the train with the signpost. But that's also how I picture what Ezekiel has. He's basically building. I've been calling it a diorama. I don't know if that's the right thing, but I see something on the ground that is basically Jerusalem, and that's where he laid, and that's where he had to do everything, and had the iron or the cast iron,
the pan and the wall
keeping
thing.
Away,
yeah,
right. So, and it said put soldiers on there, put soldiers on the wall, which means he had to build a wall. So he has a replica of the nation of Jerusalem in there, and now God says build a signpost.
Yeah,
and it seems like as part of that signpost is going to go in that diorama.
Yeah, sort of outside of the city, because there's a road leading into the city, right?
And another road seems to be leading to the Amorites.
Yeah, Ammonites,
sorry. Yeah. And this is where Nebuchadnezzar, seemingly in real life, is going to be standing at
this
two roads, a fork in the road, and he has to make a decision.
Right.
Now in here he's talking about livers and throwing bones,
which is actually true, because in under the Babylonian gods, he would have been asking his gods, okay, do I go ahead and finish taking out Judah, or do I go over here and take out the Ammonites? And there were certain ways of divination where they would cut an animal and they'd look at the liver, and he talks about arrows in his hand, and he's going to toss them up, and wherever, it's sort of literally like flipping a coin almost, heads or tails. So I'm going to throw an arrow up in the air, and which way does it land? Okay, that's one. And all of these things, as Nebuchadnezzar is finding out and he thinks he's finding out from his gods.
Yep. Meanwhile,
the true God is actually directing his steps,
rolling arrows.
Which, I mean, that sounds like Proverbs. A man decides his own way, but the heart of the king is in the Lord's hands, and all of that stuff is coming together. And God is telling Judah, he thinks he's trying to come up with a decision. I'm leading him directly to your door.
Right. So now the Ammonites are safe. At least for a day or two.
Temporarily. We'll actually see
in the rest of the chapter. Right?
Well, and in not too many chapters from now, in future chapters, we'll come to a period where Ezekiel almost stops talking about Israel for a while, and he starts talking about all these other nations, including the Ammonites, which, by the way, Ammon was the son of Lot and one of his daughters. So we're still sort of cousins, because Lot was a nephew to Abraham, and we're still.
But God also says, either last week or the week before, that not only would Jerusalem be taken care of with God's raids, but also her lovers.
Yeah.
And so is this one of the lovers that is
and so that's
taken care of?
exactly the thing, and that's why Ezekiel is going to shift in a few chapters here. Mm-hmm. He's going to shift attention, and he'll start talking about Philistia and Egypt and Ammon and Tyre and Sidon and all of these other nations that are out there. Yeah.
All right, so that's the end of the reading this week. There's actually a lot in here. 3 chapters,
but
some of it, and from different points of view, and some new things in here, which is kind of amazing. Yeah. And we get to see it all unraveling, which is cool.
Yeah, so we're not unpacking everything, of course. We don't have the time to do that or whatever. But as you're reading this, it may be the first time you've ever read some of this or ever heard some of this. Take your time, go through it, ask questions if you have questions. We love answering questions, and walk through and see how it connects. We try to make connections with other books and other sections of the Bible. See those connections and see God's plan. As this isn't just willy-nilly stuff just happening. God is in charge of what's going on here, and he does pay attention to at least some of the details as far as what he is doing with Israel. So past, present, and future, This is pretty cool. So make sure that you subscribe, and so that when we put out new videos, you'll be notified of those. Share them with your friends and family, and we will pick up here next time when we come back.
Bye, everybody.